So good afternoon. Thank you again for joining us. My name is Dean-Assael with the Community Technical Assistance Center of New York at the New York University Silver School of Social Work's Silver Institute. And I'm welcoming you to our event today called Surviving Trafficking, a conversation with a therapist and a survivor with Dr. Crenshaw and Sophia and myself. Before we get started, I want to orient everyone to our Zoom system. I know many of you have been here before, but if not, just as a reminder, everyone's placed on mute to avoid background noises. But if you need anything or have any questions, you can raise your hand. I don't know if you can raise your hand, but you can chat. We love our chat and we will chat with you. You can chat to our host, Vanessa. Thank you so much for everything, Vanessa, who will help you if you have any technical issues today. And please submit any questions you have through the chat because we collect those and we are going to have a Q&A portion as well. I will let Dr. Crenshaw and Sophia introduce themselves in a bit. But I did want to say up front that these slides and the recording will be available within 2 to 3 business days on our website, ctacny.org. And thank you so much. One more thing, there will be a quick survey at the end of this. We are here together for 2 hours. There will be a quick survey at about 2:45 that we ask you to fill out. And we do love to hear your feedback from our presentation. Okay, without further ado, we will get started. I just want to share our agenda for today. So we're doing an opening and a welcome, which includes reviewing some goals that we have for our time together. And we're going to be doing an overview. We'll be talking about trafficking and surviving trafficking with Sophia, who's joining us. And then we will be in conversation with Dr. Crenshaw and Sophia. And then we'll review some takeaways and wrap up. And then we will answer any questions that you've submitted along the way and have a brief Q&A.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Sophia. I'm a survivor of human trafficking. And before we get into everything in my story, I'd like to share our goals today. So these are our main goals that we have is to help providers understand the realities of sexual exploitation because stigma and shame may prevent a person from sharing their experiences with sex trafficking. We also want to raise awareness that people have had a myriad of experiences that they bring into therapy. And we want to help providers understand that a non-judgmental, trauma-informed clinical space can invite the people they work with to share their trauma history and the ways that they have survived.
Thank you, Sophia. So getting into our conversation, I just wanted to bring some context around our topic today, which is trafficking. There are 2 types of human trafficking recognized by New York law. One is labor trafficking and the other is sex trafficking. I also want to mention a little bit of a trigger warning that there will be sensitive content that we're going to talk about today. So please protect yourself, take good care of yourselves, and come and go if you need. But I just wanted to put that out there. Sex trafficking is when someone exploits another person and advances the prostitution or profits from another by certain methods, which include or can include the use of threats, the use of force, withholding the victim's important information, such as important documents, making someone pay off a debt by engaging in prostitution, providing them with drugs, or using trickery to get the victim into or hold the victim in prostitution and exploitation. In 2016, this is the good news, New York State implemented a plan to focus on the main areas of trafficking. The plan included raising awareness, helping to identify victims, provide better services, and also included legislative and programmatic advocacy. So that's one of the reasons this webinar is happening. To help decrease trafficking, we need to educate people, train them to identify warning signs, and understand how to assess a situation where trafficking has occurred. There were over 2,000 confirmed individuals of human trafficking in New York State between 2007 and 2021. And we often say and know that there's underreporting that happens. And so these numbers are often much higher than reported. It's important to know that trafficking does not discriminate. It does not discriminate. Evidence, though, suggests that generational trauma, historic oppression, discrimination, and other societal factors and inequities are often vulnerability factors. Traffickers are predators who recognize and take advantage of people who are at higher risk, which include those who may be experiencing housing insecurity, poverty, addiction, or have a history of experiencing abuse or unsafe situations from caregivers, substance use, or other situations. Today, we will be in conversation with Dr. Crenshaw, a therapist, and Sophia, a survivor of sex trafficking. I will now pass it over to Sophia.
Thank you. So before we get into our conversation, I would like to just tell you guys a little bit about myself and my experience. I was trafficked as a teenager. And I would always watch movies, and see about trafficking. And I always thought it was something that happened. And, you'd go to Europe or something, you go on vacation out of the country and it happens. And you don't think it's close to home. But for me, it was. The person who had brought me into the trafficking ring was actually a friend of mine. We had talked on Facebook for a couple of years, actually, and it was never anything sexual or inappropriate. We were just friends, and we would FaceTime, and we built a great relationship. And I shared a lot of issues that I had going on at home. And I do think that it is important just to briefly share with you guys my background and how I grew up, because I do feel that it did affect my susceptibility to being trafficked. So I grew up in and out of shelters. I was in foster care as a child. My mother was an addict, and she had regained custody of me when I was a teenager or early teen, and she started using again. So this friend I had met during that time, and I would share my experiences with him, and and he was a great person to talk to. And over the years, he would say, if you ever want to get out of that situation, I'll help you. And I just never really, I was always scared. Um, I didn't quite know that it was my gut telling me, not to trust him. I think it was just, you know, leaving my family behind, even if they weren't healthy. And then I ended up moving out maybe a year after being with my mom. I was about 15 at the time. And I ended up going to a transitional living program where there's a bunch of teenagers like myself who we really didn't have any guidance. So, we were out drinking and partying and, just being teenagers with no guidance. And it put me in a lot of dangerous situations. And a few things had happened to me that I, realized like I don't want to do this anymore. And I was still talking to my friend throughout the years. And I was telling him, I want to get my life together. I want to go to school. I don't want to be like my mom. And he said, I can help you. I have a family member who, can houses people like you who've experienced that and helps them go to school. And I was like, okay, yeah, let's do it. And I hopped on a train and I met up with him, and I met his, family member and all of the people there. And I didn't really think much of it. I was already around drinking. I was already around, you know, um, marijuana, and I saw the people there. They drank, they smoked, and it was normal for me. And I do want to emphasize that I didn't just go there and get caged and told, okay, this is what you're doing. I was there for a while, and they, would take me to get my hair done and my nails done, and I would tell them about my life, and they got to know me really well. And I'd cry to them about, my experiences growing up. And, one day they came to me and they said, listen, we took care of you. Now it's your turn to take care of us. And I really didn't know what to do. I mean, I was a kid, and I said, "Okay, well, I mean, what do you need me to do?" And they said, "We need you to prove that you're loyal to us." And I said, "Okay, sure." And they had brought a gentleman in the room, and they said, "We need you to have sex with him." And you know, over the years, I have replayed that moment in my head so many times because I wondered, what if I just said no? What if I just left? And that's something that a lot of victims struggle with is, we put this blame, not realizing that we were taken advantage of. I was a child. I had no business being in that situation. I was very impressionable. I was alone. I had no family that, was healthy and wanted to take care of me. And they became my family in that short period of time. So I did it. I had sex with the gentleman and I thought, this, okay, I proved my loyalty and this is over. And it wasn't. One turned into two, two turned into four, four turned into eight. And they were doctors, police officers, lawyers, family men. Where there would be people on the phone with their wives and kids saying, "Okay, yeah, I'm at the office. I'll see you later." And then pick, one of us out of a lineup. And in a short time, it became very apparent what I was a part of. But I was so terrified and also in a weird way so deeply connected to them because I felt like I owed them a debt that I didn't really think about leaving until, they started giving me drugs and they started, physically abusing me. And the Johns started physically abusing me. And I would make up these, stories with a John that I thought was super sensitive. And I thought maybe he'd just, take me away and call the cops or something. And, I'd get caught and I'd get in trouble. And the cycle had repeated itself for nearly a year until the FBI raided and I'll never forget that day. That was a very very scary day, but also the best day of my life. But they had raided and I remember they pulled me into a room and they showed me a picture of myself and they said, "Are you Sophia?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." And they said, "We've been looking for you." And yeah, and after that, it was a long process of healing. I'm still healing to this day, but I was in a hospital for a while. I was, very, very skinny, very malnourished. I was so used to being on drugs that it took me a while to detox off of them. And yeah, the process was very rough for me. And I had to kind of integrate into normal life on my own. I moved back to my hometown and I just pretended it never happened. And I did speak with lawyers and I did, go to court and help lock up one of my traffickers. They did not get them all, unfortunately. I think it's one of those things where the involvement is so it's on such a large scale that it's almost impossible, unfortunately, sometimes to get everybody who was involved with it. But the main people who were involved were arrested and sentenced. And yeah, so this is me on my journey of healing and self-discovery. And now I can say that I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm working towards happiness every day, and I'm working towards facing a lot of the demons that I was too scared to face and letting go of the blame and accept the reality of the situation and be a survivor. So I appreciate you guys listening to my story, and I can't wait to start this conversation with you.
Thank you, Sophia. Thank you so much. Bring in those hearts. Yes, thank you, Sophia. Thank you for sharing. And Sophia and I were talking. I've had many amazing conversations with both Sophia and Dr. Crenshaw. And we were saying that she's no longer her story, she's now the storyteller. And so we thought it was really important for you all to hear from Sophia about some of her experiences. And I think I failed to mention, and I apologize, that Sophia is an alias. We wanted to protect Sophia. That is why she's not on camera with us, so that she has some anonymity. chat in any questions or thoughts that you have. We appreciate you. Thank you for sharing. Everyone is saying, Sophia.
Thank you guys for listening.
I love these hearts. Thank you for that, everyone. Okay, we're going to move on and talk with Dr. Crenshaw a bit before we hear from you, Dr. Crenshaw, a bit before we get started in our conversation.
I want to mention a few things that are unique to working with survivors. And maybe I should mention, first of all, that I did work with Sophia, but at an earlier stage in her life when she was only 13 years old. And it was one of the most wonderful experiences I've ever had in therapy because she was so, and still is, so gifted, so creative. And a good part of our work was the use of poetry that she wrote that was just so profound and so moving. I couldn't believe at such a young age that she could share with me these uh, more than 20 poems during the 7 months of time that we worked together. And then after the end of our therapy work together, she continued to send me poems. And she also reached out to me when she was at a point just before the FBI entered the situation, and um, she was going through a lot of fear at that point. She's someone that I admire and respect enormously, and it's terrific to have this chance to do this presentation with her. Now, one of the things I want to say about trafficking victims is that there's a whole system involved in providing treatment for these survivors. And sometimes that is a liability. It's wonderful to think that there are all of these disciplines and all of these providers coming together to help a victim. But it doesn't always work the way. And in the literature in recent years, you'll find journal articles on something called trauma systems, in which the survivor is actually traumatized by the systems that are developed to provide help. And part of this is a breakdown in conversation, communication with the various. Probably survivors deal with more categories of providers than any other crime victim. At a minimum, law enforcement, criminal justice, the healthcare system, and mental health system as well. And all of these systems tend to be somewhat invasive by nature. And you can easily see that someone who has been exploited in a very invasive, intimate kind of way would be very, very sensitized to being treated in an invasive way by the helpers. A good example of that for those who have been sexually assaulted is the rape kit that they often have to experience in the hospital setting with specially trained nurses. And just the very nature of that examination being so intimate and focused on the intimate parts that have been exploited in their experience creates an enormous amount of anxiety, fear, and in some cases secondary trauma. But they are often told, unless you go through this procedure, there's no chance that we're going to be successful in getting you justice. So there's a pressure to cooperate with all of these invasive procedures. Now, there's another issue I would like to mention that is kind of specific to the what I call intimate wounding experience. And that is that when we're doing therapy with survivors, there is an hypersensitive reaction to any kind of coercion because they have been coerced into the trafficking situation. And Sophia explained that very clearly to us, that she thought she could trust her friend and shared a lot with her friend in the anticipation that he would be there for her and to guide her and help her, but ended up betraying her and exploiting her. So given the coercion that so many of the survivors have experienced in therapy, they can be incredibly sensitive to any kind of influence the therapist tries to exert. It may trigger them. It may bring up those feelings of coercion that they have experienced so harmfully in the past. So the therapist wants them to get better. The therapist wants them to get healthy. Even though that sounds benign, it's a certain kind of pressure, and it's something that the survivor may very well feel as something to resist and to fight. So they end up fighting against the influence that the therapist is trying to exert. So that's an issue that I think we have to be very in tune with and sensitive to. Another issue is a matter of timing. And this can only, I think, come about through experience in doing this work. And it's something important in all of psychotherapy, regardless of client, but especially important in working with survivors. And that has to do with at what point do you do a kind of confrontation with reality when, for example, the survivor thinks of their pimp as their business partner or their boyfriend, their lover, which is not uncommon in my experience working with survivors. And in one instance, I can remember working 4 years with a survivor, and it was well into the therapy. I would say probably between the second and third year that she finally was able to acknowledge that she had been exploited and victimized. Up until that point, even though she was 12 and the perpetrator was 19, she insisted that it was a business arrangement between them. And the only way that I was able to help her see that this was not really the kind of business arrangement that most of us would think of was when I asked her, what was the worst of your experiences in this business uh, uh, that you were engaged in? And she recalled one time being in the back seat of a car with two of the perpetrators who wanted sex, and she wasn't uh, in the mood, she wasn't receptive to it, and they ended up hitting her, knocking her out cold, and pushing her out of the car on the side of the road. And when she described this, I said, that doesn't sound like a business deal to me, a business arrangement. Is that how you still think of it? And at that point, she was able to see it, that she clearly had been exploited. But I think it's safer to assume that as long as they hold this notion that uh, they had agency, they had the ability to uh, be in or out, they had the power uh, to operate independently. I think it's safer to join with that until they show signs that they're ready to confront the reality. Because if you do it too soon, you'll risk losing the client in your work. They will not come back because they're not ready. They're just not at that point where they can accept what the reality really was. Because none of us like to feel that we've been manipulated or taken advantage of. Um, we would resist that. It's a very painful kind of awareness that we eventually come to. So I'll stop there in order for us to move on to the conversation together.
Thank you so much, Dr. Crenshaw. I'm not sure if you were able to introduce yourself to everyone.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
That's okay.
just jumped right in.
I shared your bio.
Yes,
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm a clinical psychologist. Um, I just recently, June 30th, retired from the Children's Home of Poughkeepsie, where I was the chief of clinical services. Um, and I had actually been clinical director in two other residential treatment centers. The one that I spent the most time in was the Astor Home for Children in Rhinebeck, um, which was a residential program. Um, that program is no longer operating. Um, and the very first one was called the Rhinebeck Country School, which was eventually taken over by Devereux. So that too is no longer operating. Um, but the last 16 years I spent at the Children's Home of Poughkeepsie. And I also had a private practice part time for 36 years in Rhinebeck, which offered me opportunities to see a wide range of both children and adults.
Thank you. Thank you. And as you were speaking, we did have a question come in that I think I'd like to address, if that's okay. Marianne says, what signs might you see that would indicate that a client is ready to confront the reality that they were trafficked?
I think obviously if they start questioning themselves, their own perception of the situation, that would be a clear sign that they're ready to move more deeply into confronting that uh, very painful reality. But I would also look at how they respond when I send up a test balloon, if you will, and challenge uh, their view, their perspective on what happened to a mild degree, to see how they respond, how open they are to that. If they're very adamant that their way of looking at this is the right way, then I'm not going to try to bully them into looking at it differently. I'll just take that as a sign that they're not ready. They're not there yet. Um, so that would be what I would look for.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's very helpful. Does anyone have any other questions for Dr. Crenshaw? You can chat them in here.
Can I answer that question from a
Please.
point of view? And we will touch base on this in a few too. But I do want to say that, at least for myself and my experience, I have always been a very vocal, upfront person. So I never, and I've worked with a lot of therapists, and I would tell them, yeah, I was trafficked. Yeah, this happened. And I think, a lot of people saw that as, oh, I've dealt with it because I was so open with it. And I've had therapists who saw that I would, briefly say, oh yeah, when I was trafficked, I had a dream about it the other day. And they didn't really help me explore, um, or process what happened, because me being so open, I guess they kind of saw it as I dealt with it. So I would say when I really started realizing that I was ready to, to work on, what happened to me and face the reality of my situation, is when the therapist that I work with now, and she's amazing, but she's a trauma specialist, and I had seeked her out because, I wanted to work on my childhood trauma. I thought I had dealt with the trafficking. And as we were working through the childhood trauma, I had said to her, I have a lot of difficulties, in my personal relationships. And I'm not quite sure that they have to do with my childhood trauma alone. I think that's part of it. But I kind of just started peeking around at different things with her. Like, do you think this can be anything else? And I think she saw it as an opportunity of, well, and she asked me, have you ever considered that you may not have healed from, your trafficking experience? So I think if there's any advice I can give, or I guess, a way to answer that from a victim's point of view, is that when they start questioning, where the connections on their life now lead to in their past, I think that's when they kind of start realizing, okay, I think I'm ready to face that. And it's different from person to person, but that was my personal experiences. I started, thinking, well, maybe there's a little more to this, maybe it's not my childhood trauma. And again, I thought I had worked on, my healing from the experience of being trafficked. And I realized that I didn't work on it at all. And me asking those questions helped me realize that, and help my therapist see that, I didn't face it.
Thank you, Sophia.
Very important.
Yeah, it's such an important reminder that we can be open about our experiences, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we've worked through them and processed them. And thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. Before we get started, I do want to have a word about our language. You'll see that we use the word survivor and we also use the word victim. And I don't know, Sophia, because we've had several conversations about this, if you'd want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, of course. While we were preparing for this, I kind of had an epiphany. And, I think as a survivor, there's a lot of sensitivity around the situation. And, when I share it with people, and I say the word victim, they're like, well, you're a survivor. And I had shared with Dr. Crenshaw and Kara that, I can't be a survivor without being a victim. And it was a common thing in my life is that I was always waiting for the moment to pass by. Even in my childhood, I was waiting for the trauma to end. Okay, I'll be 18 soon, I'll be out of foster care soon, even with the trafficking, it's over. I don't have to deal with it. And I had said to them, I was waiting out the storm, but I never felt the rain. And I think that people see the term as a victim as weak, and that there's something about that word that I've noticed a lot of people feel that it takes your power away. But how can you be a survivor without being a victim? And I think that's something that I really want to stress to everybody today is that whether you are a survivor, whether you're working with a survivor, is that there's no shame in being a victim, because that's what I am. I was a victim, and once I was able to accept that, I was able to start healing. When you're not willing to accept that you were victimized, you can't, your defense is up, right? And you're thinking of the situation as, well, I'm not weak. I made it through that. But it's okay. It's okay to say that this happened to me and it was unfortunate. And no matter how I got there, I was taken advantage of. And I think there's so much power in saying that and accepting that, because there's growth in seeing that, these things happen and I'm still here. So I do go back and forth between survivor and victim, because as I am still healing through this, I do see myself as a survivor, and I'm still, you know, going through the emotions of being victimized. Healing is not linear. And I think that's very important for any survivor to realize that, you can, I mean, it's been 10 plus years since I was trafficked, and I still, sometimes I feel great and it's, a blur in the back of my mind. And sometimes I'm so weak in the knees because I woke up and I had this dream and I was traumatized all over again. And that's okay. And that's a part of accepting that you are a victim. So we do use that term a lot in this conversation. I am going to use it a lot, and I just want you guys to know that there is power in that, and you still are strong.
Thank you, Sophia. I do want to just say again, I've said to you many times, but that I'm just so truly sorry for what you went through, and how brave and grateful we are for you to share your story and your experiences with everyone. And I wanted to let you all know that we were in conversation many times and developed the next questions together. So we're going to move into our conversation. And so I'm going to share a question, and then I'll stop sharing my screen so we can be in conversation. And then I'll bring it up again for the next question. Okay. So let's start by talking about what therapists can do to really help someone experiencing trafficking. So we know it may take a survivor a long time before, as you both were talking about, right? To realize and be able to talk about what really happened to them. And so what can therapists do to really help someone who's experienced trafficking?
I definitely think that it's something that there's no timeline you can put on it, because every victim is different, and sometimes the wounds go deeper than trafficking. Sometimes it starts, as a child, and you kind of get used to abuse and neglect. And so when you're in that pattern of behavior for so long, it's so hard to realize that you're in it and get out of it. I think a lot of the therapists that I worked with, a lot of the breakthroughs that I had was being encouraged to, you know, accept myself, because I think being trafficked for the time that I lost myself. And, and I would see myself in the mirror, but I didn't feel like I was in my body, if that makes sense. I just felt like I was looking at a shell. And I think that it was very helpful, working with therapists who, you know, even if they didn't think I was ready to start talking about trafficking, that they helped me talk about myself, kind of bring myself back into my body, help me realize that I'm no longer a shell of, of what I've experienced, but I'm this person. And I feel like once you, work on being in tune with yourself, then you can start the healing process. And that's a lot of the work that I did in therapy, was recognizing myself and who I was, um and what I've experienced, because it did become a part of me.
Thank you, Sophia. Dr.
I
Crenshaw.
want to say that I try to be very careful.
Oh, you're breaking up a little bit. Sorry.
Okay. Maybe if I close my video,
Okay.
you can hear the audio better. I Many survivors have expressed the anger, really, that so many people talk for them and try to describe the experience of the survivor, that only the survivor herself, or occasionally it's a male, uh, himself. Um, Only they can know what that experience is truly like. Therapists can approximate it. Um, Therapists can seek to understand and be persevering in helping and understanding and creating a safe, um, therapeutic context where survivors can, when they're ready, share their story. But therapists can't know what the experience really is, and it's different for every survivor. It's not like you get to know the story of the survivor, and that's it. You're all set. Uh, it has to be explored with every individual in a very uh,
Oh, you're cutting out a bit.
Are you there?
up. Um, Otherwise, if we think we know the story, we stop listening.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously. So I feel that one of the things that it's very basic, but it's very big, judgmental, um, sensitively attuned to the person, and therefore we are creating a context in which it's safer for them to share with us. In my private practice over those 36 years, I frequently would see adolescent clients who had seen previous therapists, and they wanted to disclose the trauma of sexual assault or, in a few cases, trafficking. And they were not convinced that their therapist was ready to hear it. And so important that we convey our ability, our readiness to hear their story. If they're going to shock us or crush us by giving us, this story that somebody who's not in the field might indeed be horrified by, then we're not going to be of help. So we have to make ourselves emotionally available and in a way that is receptive and inviting. And that's how like to think of my approach. I like to think of it as an invitational approach, inviting them to go as far as they can and as far as it's helpful for them to share their story at any given time. And I anticipate that in a session where they might disclose quite a lot, the next session they may not want to talk about it at all. That that's part of their own self-pacing and self-regulation. Know they need to that and respect that. To be so sensitively attuned to those signs, and they may be somatic cues. I remember one survivor who, whenever she tried to talk about what really happened, she would break eye contact. She would look down at the floor and she would start pursing her lips in an obvious sign of anxiety. And at those times, she sometimes write about it. Sometimes she could make a drawing to express what she was feeling. But other times we needed to just shift to something that was more neutral and not so powerful in order to pace things properly. So it requires our sensitivity from session to, even in the same session, we have to be dynamic enough that we can adjust, because they may start out telling us a lot of the experience, but then get triggered at some point, and they need to break it off. I like to use a metaphor that I learned from a Ericksonian therapist by the name of Joyce Mills. She talked about, imagine that we're looking at a family album. And as we look at the pictures, we see these really cute pictures of you when you were a baby, you were a little girl, and you were so loved and cherished. And, those are warm, loving feelings. And then there are these pictures of the family going on on vacation. And
I'm just going to review some of these beautiful questions that are coming in. Anna asks, do you feel that therapeutic methods such as journaling or writing poetry or stories can help a survivor get to a place where they can begin to express their feelings or experiences rather than directly speaking about them? One of my clients struggles with verbal expression, but her poems speak volumes. Sophia, I don't know if you can relate to this.
Yeah, actually, I started writing poetry when I was working with Dr. C when I was in foster care. Went in at 12, and he had encouraged me to try and write about, you know, my experiences or just anything, honestly. And it is something I still do to this day. I really do enjoy writing, and I think that it is a lot easier to express in a poem what you're feeling than to, you know, just say it to someone. So I do encourage that if you have a client that or a patient that is, you know, into writing or even art. I used to love drawing, and that's what I was into before I started writing poetry. And you know, even in between, I would go back and forth, and even my drawings, there was so much pain and feeling and just confusion in it, but a lot of beauty. And I think that when I look back at a lot of drawings that I did when I was a preteen and teenager, realized that they have so much significance because they expressed what I was going through. So I do encourage that you guys reach out to your clients and encourage them to find any way that helps them, you know, talk about what they're going through or express it in some way. There needs to be, everybody needs an outlet. I think that's very important.
Mhm.
And I do want to say, when Dr. C was talking, there was something that I did want to kind of
Please.
emphasize because he was saying that when we are talking about, you know, when he's working with clients, and I'm sure he's experienced that with me as well, is one day you want to get into the heavy stuff, you want to talk about it, and then some days you don't want to talk about anything. And a perfect example would be, you know, a couple weeks ago, I was talking to my current therapist, and it was heavy. You know, it was emotional. We were crying, we were talking, and it, you know, it was very great conversation. And then the next week, I'm like, yeah, I don't know what to get for lunch. I just I was emotionally drained because even though, you know, you see your therapist once a week or bi-weekly or whatever the case is, there's so much that happens in that time, right? And sometimes you want to talk about it. Sometimes it relates to, you know, your trafficking experience. And sometimes you just don't have anything to say, but you still want that person there. You know, I can't tell you how many times I've talked to my therapist about absolutely nothing. I'm talking about like the 4 for 4 menu on at Wendy's. We just would talk about that. And it just, I still needed it. And it became apparent to me that I needed it because one day, or one month, there was so much going on in our schedules that we could not keep our sessions for that month. And I felt like I was going insane and I couldn't figure out why. I'm like, I really had nothing to talk to her about last month. I mean, you know, there nothing significant happened in the month, but just having someone there that I felt comfortable with to talk to for an hour once a week was so significant to me that it really affected me when I did not have that. So sometimes when you have a client who's not saying anything, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not reaching them. It just could mean that they're comfortable with you. And right now, they just don't have anything to share that they want to talk about right now. Sometimes there's beauty in the silence or in the simplicity of the conversation. And I think that's very important to emphasize that not every session is going to be a breakthrough.
Thank you, Sophia. And just for therapy speak for a second, I can say that that's kind of the idea behind titration. So those of you that are familiar with somatic therapy and other forms of therapy that use titration, that's exactly why, because we don't want to contribute to overwhelm, right? Because when we're overwhelmed, that can actually lead to re-traumatization. So thank you, Sophia, for bringing that into light for us. Next question we had, we're talking about what are the pitfalls that therapists face in working with victims and survivors of trafficking?
Um, I would like to start by saying that when you are experiencing trafficking, and I think this is a common thing amongst a lot of survivors, is that you learn to put on this face, right? You learn to um, adapt to any situation, because realistically and I apologize for being so forward, but you're, at least for my experience, they would line us all up and someone would pick, and you'd have to, no matter whatever time you're with that person, you'd have to figure out what type of person you need to be to survive that moment. Everybody was different, and I had to have so many personalities. And when I, was rescued from the trafficking ring, I didn't know how to turn that off. So I just had all of these faces that I would wear, and manipulation was my best friend because it's how I survived. I learned how to manipulate and how to, get what I wanted out of people. So when I first started, like the first year after trafficking, I had very bad PTSD, and I wasn't, I couldn't see that I was saved from something, but rather I was taken from my home, even though I knew how painful it was and I knew how harmful it was for me, but I didn't face it yet. I just knew that that's all I knew for, the past year of my life, and that was significant to me. And when I was working with, one of my first counselors, I would just put on this face and I would just pretend to be who I needed to be in that moment, because it was a survival technique. And I think that's something that a lot of people will face with working with survivors is how do you get to the real person under the mask? Because you have to break through that exterior that I've had up, that they have up, that, hey, listen, like, you don't have to pretend to be anybody with me. This is the safe space. Because again, a lot of the Johns that I saw were lawyers, doctors, police officers. I mean, your trust is so, like, you don't even, I think it was impossible for me to really trust anybody. I mean, Dr. C, of course I trusted him. And I had reached out to him because I'd known him for so long. But I mean, after that situation, I was introduced to so many lawyers, so many FBI agents who said, hey, we're going to help you. We're going to, I remember someone had offered me Pringles. They were like, I heard you say you like Pringles. So here's Pringles. And now tell me about your trafficking situation. And in my head, I'm like, screw you. Like, this is another manipulation tactic, because that's what I experienced for a year is being told what I wanted to hear. So I learned how to do it in return. So I think working with therapists, I carried that on for a while, um, until I finally worked with a therapist who helped me kind of break through that and was like, this isn't you. Yeah, you're saying you're fine, you're saying everything's okay, but this is a face that you're wearing. You're wearing this mask. It's not who you are. And I think that's a common problem that you might face with survivors is getting past um, that manipulation tactic. And I don't think it sounds like such a negative thing, but it really is a survival tactic.
Can you discuss, Sophia, we'll start with you. Can you discuss the challenges of developing safety and trust in therapy with survivors? And I think you actually started touching on this in your previous answer around the pitfalls. But I also want to say that when we were talking about it, one of the things that I kept hearing from you, Sophia, was around not being spoken to like you're a case or that you're just a person on, oh, sorry, on the caseload, on someone's caseload, right?
Mhm.
And that following through and consistency is what really helps to build trust. So I'm wondering if you could share other thoughts around building trust, because we know in some ways this is really the crux of the therapeutic relationship in healing.
Yeah, of course. I think one of the biggest things is honesty and transparency. Like I said, when I always bring up the Pringles story because it sounds so silly, but it just kind of spoke magnitudes. I felt like, they were treating me like I was a child when I first got out of trafficking. Like I was so delicate that they were trying, it felt like they were trying to sell me the dream of, well, if you just tell us, what happened to you, we can help you. Right. And not that there wasn't any truth to that, but I think that there was this kind of way that they were speaking to me with like so soft and almost like it was so easy. Like if you just tell us this, then everything's handled, your burdens are gone, and you know, we'll fix this. But that's not the reality of it, right? And there's so many emotions, there's so much healing, because even if they were to lock up everybody who was involved, I still have to live with this for the rest of my life, essentially, right? And I think, and a lot of the people that I've worked with over the years since I was trafficked, um, because I'm so open, and it's one of the things where I'll just say so casually, yeah, I'm a survivor of human trafficking, and you can kind of see this switch in people, and then they start treating you like you're this broken little thing. And I think that there needs to be a lot more transparency between a client and a therapist, or a client and a social worker, anybody that you're dealing with who's been trafficked, because they understand the magnitude of what they've been through. Even if they don't understand it fully, they know that they've been through something. So selling them a dream or trying to be so delicate about the situation isn't going to help them face it, rather than make them feel like they're being manipulated. In a lot of cases, that's how I felt, is, how dare you offer me Pringles when I just went through the most traumatic experience of my life? Like, I'm a child, and, you're giving me a cookie and it's going to make me open up. And I think that that's something that's so important to shine a light on, is sometimes, the truth is hard to hear, but ultimately, a lot of times people want the truth. They want to know, listen, this is difficult. It's going to take time. I might not ever be able to help you fully heal, but I can help you figure out how to start. And when you're being trafficked, you're being promised so many things. I was promised that I'd be able to go back to school, that I would be successful, that this was all towards a bigger goal that I just couldn't understand. And when I got out of it, I was tired of promises. I was tired of manipulation. And there's just a lot of there's a lot of I'd say, like, not that they're bad efforts, but I'm trying to think of the word. I don't want to say like that they're not educated on the matter, but I guess a way to say it, maybe you can help me with this, is there's a lot of sensitivity, I guess, towards the matter. And with sensitivity comes tiptoeing. And, I think that's the worst thing you experience as a victim, is somebody who, is supposed to be here to help you, and they're walking on eggshells around you.
Thank you. I think that's the readiness that Dr. C was mentioning, right? That you show that you're ready to hear what people have been through, and that you're able to hold hearing what you've experienced for the person, with the person.
Mhm.
It's the same with parents. Kids will not tell their trauma story to parents unless they're convinced the parent is able and willing to hear it. Otherwise, they'll be protective of the parents.
Mm-hmm.
And our clients can be protective of us if they think we're not able to hear it, if they're going to traumatize us by telling the story.
Yeah.
I want to finish that
Yes.
metaphor if I can. So the child is looking through, or the adult is looking through the family photograph album, and they see these pictures that are happy memories of when they were young, when they went on family vacations, things that bring such warm feelings to their heart, and seeing the pictures when they were babies and being held and hugged. And then as they keep turning the pages, they come to a page where their grandma is in the picture. and Grandma died this past year. So it's so painful that they decide to close the album up and put it on the shelf. And in therapy, we're going to do that same thing here. I'm going to invite you to go as far as you can in talking about the things that are really hard for you, really painful for you. But when you can't go any further, we're going to close it up, put it on the shelf, and come back to it at a time that's more comfortable for you. Now, both of those things are important. A time that's more comfortable for you, but also we will come back. You know, you plant the expectation that we will be able to do this. We will be able to confront the hard stuff. I'm just simply respecting the pace that you need to go.
Thank you. Thank you. And Sophia actually talked a little bit about that in a different way around, you know, some days in therapy. I don't want to, Sophia, I don't know if you want to chime in about, you know, sometimes you just want to talk about nothing with your therapist.
Yes. Yeah. Dr. C, I was explaining to them how even with the therapist I work now, and I'm sure, you know, when we work together, you've experienced that where there are days that I just didn't want to talk about anything, you know, it'd just be nonsense. What am I going to wear tomorrow? I have so much stuff to do this weekend. And wanted to emphasize that there's, you know, not always going to be a breakthrough every session, you know, but sometimes there's a lot of power in just those meaningless conversations, because it's company as you build a relationship with your therapist. You get more comfortable with them, where not everything has to be this huge amount of work to get to deeper side of things. And I was sharing with everybody that I had 1 month, me and my current therapist, our schedules just didn't align, and I didn't see her for a month, and I felt like I was going nuts, and I couldn't figure out why. I mean, nothing significant had happened, but I just realized that, you know, even when we didn't talk about much, it was so impactful to me, because I had this safe space where I could share, you know, just anything. You know, it could just be the most simple thought that I have of, you know, well, you know, I'm debating if I want this for dinner, but it was just nice to, because I have so much trust and such a good relationship with my therapist, that I felt comfort in just talking about the little thing. I mean, it's kind of like a partner, right? Where you come home and you tell your spouse, you know, even the silliest things. Hey, guess what happened at work today? You know, Jim dropped his pencil and blah blah blah. And it's meaningless, but it's just something you want to share, because you enjoy having that safe space to be able to do that. And I think that's the same thing with these therapists. If we see them, you know, once a week, once every 2 weeks, whatever the case is, but that 1 hour or whatever, 45 minutes that may have can be so impactful of just having that release of, this is my space, this is where I get to let my guard down, even if we're not talking about the most traumatic things, even if it's just the beauty and the simplicity of it, right? And I just, you know, I think that's really important to recognize for anybody that's working with survivors, or just anybody in general, is that, you know, sometimes it's not, you know, don't look at it as, oh, we didn't talk about anything today. Maybe, you know, they're not willing to open up, but maybe they just find it comforting just to not talk about much and just have that space.
I think I should mention that in my work with survivors, I've been helped enormously. I know this is not possible for every therapist, but we have facility dogs in our program at the children's home. And these dogs are animals that are extremely well trained. They're trained as service dogs, but they're assigned to a facility. And the survivors have been able to bond quickly and almost immediately with the dogs, even though it takes them a long time to trust the therapist. But eventually, the fact that the dog trusts us and is responsive to us is part of what helps us gain trust with the survivor. And a lot of times they'll bring the dog in, and on the days that they don't feel like talking, they'll get down on the floor and play with the dog or lay their head on the dog. And sometimes I've been able to talk to them through the dog. I'll give you an example. One of the survivors I worked with, some days she could be very talkative and share a whole lot, and then she might come in and be completely nonverbal, unable to say anything. So she's laying on the floor with her head on the dog, and the dog's name is Marshall. So I say to Marshall, I think I'll make up a name. I think Sherry is unable to talk today, and you picked up on that right away because you're laying next to her. You're allowing her to lay her head on you. So you're just being a comforting presence. And maybe that's all we can be today, just a presence, a safe, caring presence, because today she is unable to talk. And what happened right after that particular session is the next time she came in, she couldn't stop talking. She just had so much she wanted to say. But I think our ability to honor where she was at that moment and make that totally okay, that she lay her head on the dog and be with the dog on the floor, enabled her to take that next step.
And I think, as we've mentioned before, I've worked with Dr. C, when I was 13 in foster care. And I remember having, was it Ivy? I think it was Ivy.
Yes.
That sat in our sessions, and it really did make a big difference. And I do like to stress that it was one of the things that did help me open up and even just have some comfort on the days that I did not want to share things. So I can speak personally to that experience of, having dogs sit in on sessions, that it is very comforting.
What a wonderful service you have. I have not heard of that. That's wonderful. And thank you for explaining how you engage with the animal and through also the young person. And Sophia, it sounds like you actually experienced that too. Amazing. Dr. Crenshaw, we talked about pitfalls. Are there any pitfalls that you want to talk about in terms of therapists that therapists may face in working?
Well, one of them that I already mentioned that's so important is I think we have to show humility. I'll never forget in my private practice a long time ago, a 16-year-old boy made a suicide attempt over the weekend and was taken to the emergency room. And I was processing this with him in the office on a Monday morning, and I asked him about his experience with the psychiatrist at the hospital. And he said, well, I think he was overtrained, which I thought was so interesting. And I asked him what he meant about this, and he said, well, I had the feeling he'd heard this story 500 times before, and he just didn't seem to have any feeling one way or the other. So what was missing there was any kind of ability to treat this story as unique, as idiosyncratic, as special. And this is a person here in front of you, not a case. The ability to retain our capacity for feeling, to be genuine. I think unless we're able to be a genuine human being, all the training and interventions we've learned aren't going to be that helpful. I think that's a foundational point that just has to be there. That sense that you're talking to a real person, a real human being, and it was lacking for that 16-year-old boy. So whenever we think, oh, we know this, we've heard this so many times, that's when there's a real danger that we're really not paying attention. We're not really listening. The other pitfall that I think we all have to work with ourselves on this, constantly monitoring ourselves, is implicit bias that, and by definition, it's implicit, it's unconscious, it's outside of awareness, but the client will feel it. They won't miss it. Some kind of judgment on our part that we might not even know is there. But in our culture, there's been a lot of attitudes, a lot of strong feelings about sex workers, about engaging in sex work. And sometimes people can't get past that. Their judgment, their disapproval will certainly come through. So we have to constantly work with our own attitudes and our own expanding our awareness of what we hold in the way of beliefs and values, because that can really trip up the therapy process. Stop it right in its tracks. If there, the refrain I hear all over and over and over again from clients is, "Please don't judge me. Please don't judge me." So that's I think a huge pitfall, and can only be dealt with by our own work with ourselves in therapy, both in a formal process, in things like peer supervision, consultations with colleagues, supervision with more experienced colleagues, and also self-monitoring. Freud, at the end of every day, when seeing patients, spent 30 minutes at the end of the day examining the feelings that arose in him that day in his work with his various patients. And he felt this was essential, absolutely essential, in order to be effective. So I applaud that, and I think it's something that we all need to do.
Very powerful. Thank you so much. We're going to move on to one of our last questions, which is let's discuss the resilience of victims and survivors.
Well, I'll start if that's okay with you, Sophia.
Yeah, of course.
Resilience is something that I think is absolutely critical in this work, to respect the strengths of our clients. And certainly it's the case in working with victims and survivors, because part of the exploitation is to try to demolish their sense of self, their sense of efficacy, their identity as a person. So these things that seem so obvious to us, this is a very intelligent person, very creative person, someone who's so relatable, has wonderful social skills. That may be obvious to us, but not to the client. So we have to look for ways to call their attention to these strengths. And so it's not recommended that you just give a little speech about it, but as it comes up, when they're talking, sometimes they'll come up with an insight, and I'll say, that's brilliant. I hadn't thought about it that way. I really respect your ability to sift through all of this and come up with that kind of self-understanding. So you tie it to something very specific that you both have witnessed, and it's much more powerful. Just general reassurance, you're a wonderful person. That's not helpful, because for one thing, they're going to be hyper vigilant to that kind of thing, because it might remind them of grooming when they've been set up for exploitation. So just general reassurance is of no help. But being able to pinpoint and identify as you go along things that they reveal right there in the room with you as strengths can be enormously helpful.
Thank you. Sophia, do you have thoughts?
Yes. I think that it took me a while to see the resilience that I had. It took me a couple of years actually. And I do thank a lot of the therapists that I've worked with, even Dr. C, of course, one of the main people that has always encouraged me to see the things that I overcame. And I think that it's so important that we do the same. Not even, I mean, even if you're not a therapist, even if you're not working directly with clients, I mean, I'm a big believer in the smallest things go such a long way. And you never know, what people have gone through when you're talking to them. I can guarantee you a lot of people in my life don't know my experiences because, it's not this, this gown that you wear that says, hey, I'm a survivor. It's not something that you just carry on with you in every conversation. And I think that just reminding people of just the beauty and the resilience that everybody carries, because not everybody's trauma is the same, but it doesn't make it any less significant. is so important, but especially when you're working with clients who've experienced any type of trauma, just reminding them to find that the resilience in themselves and honor themselves and love themselves. I mean, that's probably one of the most important parts of the work that I've seen and I've experienced, you know, working with therapists and working with counselors is the ones that I remember the most are the ones that really help me find myself and see the strengths that I didn't think I had. So yeah, I think that's very important to stress to everybody, you know, after they survive something traumatic, that they are resilient. They're still here, you know, even if they're not where they want to be, they're still here.
Mhm. Thank you. Thank you so much. Resilience takes time, knowing it, feeling it in yourself, knowing it about yourself, and focusing on strengths is one way to build that resilience. How you came to know about this poem, Sophia, and if you want to read it to us. It's called Autobiography in 5 Chapters.
Yeah, of course. I was recently at an event and we were talking about trafficking and about the importance of, you know, um, how those behaviors and those experiences can carry into, you know, just integrating into the regular world. I've experienced it myself. I know so many people have, and being re-victimized. And I was talking with a good long-term friend of mine, who actually was the director at the Children's Home of Poughkeepsie and Wall, and he was telling me about this poem, and it kind of, you know, I was immediately fascinated and I was trying to find it. And Dr. C was so kind to find it for us, because I think it expresses how we can fall back into those patterns and those behaviors of trauma that we're so used to and so exposed to, especially when you have a childhood traumas. So it's, but I want to read it to you guys and see if you guys can resonate with it at all. So, chapter 1, I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk, and I fall in. I'm lost. I am hopeless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. Chapter 2, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it, and I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place, but it isn't my fault. It takes a long time to get out. Chapter 3, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it is there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. I get out immediately. Chapter 4. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5. I walk down another street. And I love this because, as simple as it seems, it really does explain in the best way trauma and trauma cycles, you know, and how, you know, a lot of victims that I know, and myself included, we fall down the same pattern. And it's not because, you know, in the beginning we don't know any better, but because we're so used to it, and it is a habit, you know, it becomes familiar and it becomes comfortable. There's a type of comfortability in the discomfort of it all. So I thought that this would be a great poem to share with you guys, because it really does speak magnitudes from at least from my point of view as a survivor and a victim of, you know, we are constantly healing every day, and I don't know that the healing will ever end. I'm hopeful and I'm very resilient. I know that I will keep healing, but, you know, sometimes I might fall in that hole again, and I'm going to always remind myself to get out, and eventually I'm going to walk down another street. And I think that's so important to think about when we are working with victims and we see patterns, to show them a different road.
Thank you. Thank you, Sophia, so much. I
It
think
speaks to the
so-
power of reenactments that are so much a part of trauma. And so often it happens outside of awareness that people make the same wrong choices in terms of relationships, unhealthy relationships, but they're not aware that they are repeating an original trauma. This is a terrific poem in terms of helping us realize that a lot can happen that would be easy to blame the person and say, oh, you know, they brought it on themselves, without realizing that this goes on outside of awareness. And for all of us, there's so much that goes on outside of awareness. So there's no need to be judgmental or blaming about it.
So thank you again for all of your time and efforts. I just wanted to spend a little bit of time around takeaways and wrap-ups. What are you hoping that people take away from our conversation today?
I'm hoping that they have a better understanding from a victim and survivor's point of view. You know, that everybody, I mean, there's so much complexity in everybody's experience, that, you know, my story is just one story of many, and it's so different, but hopefully you guys can take from what I've experienced in my life and be able to use what you learned today and better help, you know, your clients and help really help them find themselves. And anybody who's experiencing anything, you know, difficult in Ashiba, I appreciate you sharing with us. It takes a lot of vulnerability to share, you know, that you can resonate. Not a lot of, I mean, it sounds so simple to say that, but there's a lot of strength in saying that, you know, you can resonate with what I'm saying, and I'm sorry that you can. And I don't mean that in an ill way. It's just, it's sad that we all have these fears and these experiences because of the world out there, but because we are here today, it makes us so powerful. And I want everybody to see that the people that they're working with or themselves, like we hold so much power in just being so resilient and being able to you know, share our experiences and help others. And I just hope that everybody continues to do that.
Thank you, Sophia.
In terms of takeaway from my standpoint, I can't overemphasize the issues of safety and trust. I would ask the question, why should a survivor trust you? Why should they? Given all the betrayals, letdowns, exploitation, humiliation they've suffered, why should they trust you at all? And one of the things that survivors have taught me is that if they can trust us on the little things, they are more likely to trust us on the big things. For example, one of the trafficked victims in our program wanted to, at Christmas time, wanted to send a sweatshirt that she had bought to her boyfriend, for her boyfriend. But it was a little thing, but she didn't have a box to pack it in. In a residential program, you take things for granted, but those are issues for the kids. So I went all through the main building from office to office until I found in the physical department a box that was the right size. And I took it over to her, and she was so thrilled. And then after she packed it up, she realized, how am I going to mail it? I can't get to the post office. I said, I'll take it for you. And that was a little thing, but it meant a lot to her and made it easier for her to trust me. I would also say that we can never take safety for granted, because in the middle of the night they can have a dream or a trauma reminder or an intrusive thought that takes them right back to the trauma. And so we need to constantly check in terms of where they are in terms of feeling safe. And that includes safe in the therapy room with us. Because if they don't feel safety with us, we're not going to be able to help. And that's where reading somatic cues is so important. So I'll stop there. There's more I could say about it, but I want to leave time for other people.
And I know our time's ending, but I do want to stress, because while you're talking, some things did come up that I want to make sure that we do discuss briefly. I'll try and be as quick as possible, but I strongly believe that there are a lot of when you meet victims of trafficking, most of the time, they are more susceptible because of their childhood experiences, and even after being trafficked, you're so used to or so accustomed to the abuse and the toxicity of it all, that sometimes you find yourself in abusive relationships, abusive friendships, relationships with family members. I mean, really anybody. I mean, it took me a couple years to realize that my family was so toxic for me, because I grew up thinking, well, they're blood, and that's all that matters, and we're family, and at the end of the day we have each other. But that's not true, and I don't have a relationship with a lot of them today, and I'm happy to say that, because I had to, put myself first, and I had to stay strong and realize that what I want. And I think a lot of the behaviors weren't okay. And I think that it's so important when you work with a survivor to help them identify when they may be dealing with a friendship, dealing with a relationship, or a relationship with a family member, a spouse, whatever. Being able to help them identify abuse, identify toxicity, identify those unhealthy behaviors, because when you're trafficked and you suffer from PTSD, you kind of seek that that behavior, even if you know it's bad. You seek it because you're so used to it. It's normal. It's comforting, in an ill way, And I think that that's something. If there's anything to be mindful about, is, as if you're working with a survivor who's kind of getting back into the integrating into the world again, after being trafficked, helping them prevent further victimization, being victimized even further, and finding themselves in abusive relationships. I think that's so important. Prevention is so important. And even before trafficking, if you meet victims, people who have been abused as children, molested as children, or young adolescents, I think it's so important to help them navigate through the world, because you truly can prevent, and not always, but in some instances, you can prevent them getting into those situations just by educating them, by being that support, so they're not looking for that support somewhere else. And it's a big ask, but unfortunately, that's the world we are in today, where these things do happen and they are common. And I think it's so important that we educate everybody on it, and that we give them these support systems to prevent, this, things like this, or any magnitude of trauma happening.
Yes, yes. We did not get to talk about vulnerability factors as much as we wanted to. So thank you, Sophia, for mentioning that there are often experiences that people have had when they were younger that help them understand what relationships may look like for them, and they continue in those relationships. And so we were thinking we could do just a whole event on how to support the people we work with around developing healthy relationships, right? So our time is coming to an end. Sophia, You are incredible. We're so grateful for all that you've shared with us. Dr. Crenshaw, you are incredible as well. The field is so lucky to have had you for so long. And I know that Sophia has also benefited from your amazing talents. We don't have much time for questions. We've been answering them along the way. We do have some resources. The slides will be available in 2 to 3 days. We have some resources. We have some references for you if you wanted to go in deeper that have informed Dr. Crenshaw, especially around his work, and just some upcoming events that we have in CTAC. So we have coming up, we have a live screening and discussion of implicit bias. So Dr. Crenshaw was talking about implicit bias. Join us for this, what it is and why it matters. That's on Monday, actually, from 1 to 2:30. And then we have supporting youth who exhibit problematic sexual behaviors. That's on October 16th from 1 to 2. I think that is all. Do you have any last words, Sophia or Dr. Crenshaw?
I just want to say thank you, everybody, for tuning in and just hearing what we have to say. I really do hope that a lot of you found this very useful. And, if anybody has been experiencing, or knows anybody who's experiencing trafficking, I do encourage you to, use every support system you have to, get the help. It's okay to be a victim, but you will be a survivor. And just make sure that your clients know that as well, that they are surviving this, and whether it's 10 years later, 2 years later, 2 months. I mean, they're so strong for persevering and continuing their journey. It's not easy, but I appreciate all of you for for joining in on this and listening to what we have to say and hearing my story. And I'd love to do this again sometime.
I'd like to say thank you for your patience with me as I tried to deal with our technical problems.
Thank you. Thank you both. Again, this has been such a pleasure. And I hope you all take care, and we'll see you another day.